Hey guys, I believe we're going to be having a balance patch tomorrow, but I did want to share a little bit of a teaser that was given to us about this potential balance patch that's coming up. And that's something called loan talents. Now, loan talents are kind of interesting, and they they're a unique idea that you will gain a lot of power initially, but it's only on a loan and you're going to be losing that later. And so the basic idea of a loan talent, and this is the example that they gave. So let me start off with the example that they've given. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And I'm also going to explain there's some pros and cons about it when you look at it from kind of a, not just a gameplay perspective, but kind of a what we enjoy in a game perspective. So let's read this from Blizzard's Daybringer. He says, "Good morning, heroes. There is some new content coming around the corner, and I wanted to take a quick minute to share something that will be entering the Nexus shortly. Loan talents. Here's a sneak peek at one of them. It's a talent for Johanna called Divine Fortress. Basic attacks against enemy heroes grant 15 physical armor for 3 seconds, stacking up to 60. So it's kind of a worse version of Reinforce, and I'd imagine it's going to replace Reinforce at level 1. Reinforce is when you use a basic ability, you get 60 physical armor. This doesn't need to hit anyone. Just anytime that you use a basic ability, you get 60 physical armor for 2.5 seconds. It's instantly 60. It ramps up all the way up to 60 immediately, where this one's going to require 4 attacks. So on average, 4 seconds entering a fight, getting 4 attacks to get up to that 60. Now, this could potentially last longer, but the longer you're in a fight, auto-attacking someone, you're probably going to get shredded very quickly. And not having self-healing, if your healer is not paying a lot of attention to you, or you're having a healer that doesn't do a lot of single target healing, like early game Lucio, this talent can struggle a lot. And that's why most Johannas play a little bit more with like an in-out playstyle. They go in, they throw some abilities, they press hold your ground, they get out. Or they go in, they press some abilities, they press their trait, get out, pop Laws of Hope, depending on your healer or what playstyle you want to go. But because it's a nerfed talent, or it's weaker than it was before, they're giving it a loan, which is going to be something new that they're adding to the game to many heroes. This loan says Johanna gains 20 max health. You lose 5% of this bonus every time that she dies. So you can't go below your 100% health. You take this talent, you go to 120. Every death, you're going to go 115, 110, 105, 100, and then many more deaths. You're still not going to lose any more. You get an initial burst of power at the start of the game, but then you lose this benefit as the game goes on, assuming that you're dying. The idea behind this was to give a fairly substantial upfront power spike. They can either help carry you to victory or potentially lose potency over time. Think of them as reverse quests. Play smart, and they can be extremely powerful over the course of the game, but know that you're choosing it. You're also putting a substantial target over your head, and then they use convection as the example of that. Anyway, the team is excited to see what you think about these and to get your hands on them as soon as possible. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the Nexus. So we may get this patch tomorrow, we may get this patch next week on Wednesday, but I wanted to talk about the idea of loan quests and the idea of and quests, I guess. So I'm going to use a lot of psychology, but in order to do that, the first rule of adding something to the game is, and this is a rule that was kind of created from League of Legends. League of Legends said that when they were initially designing the game, a lot of people were playing it just because it was a MOBA and it was only thing out. But as more MOBAs started getting created, they needed to find a way to keep their game more interesting. So they said every single thing that they designed, they had 2 major things in mind, with a third is kind of a secondary, because they can always adjust it later. Number 1, is it fun to play? Number 2, is it fun to play against? Or at least bearable to play against. And number 3 is how the balance works on that. Is it going to be easy to balance? Is it something that we can at least eventually balance? And so that is the basic idea of what every game developer should work on. I'm not saying League has done that perfectly. I'm just saying that that's what they've said that they've gone for. And I think that's a great approach. So we're going to talk about, are loan talents fun to play against, and easy to balance? And that's where we're going to end up with kind of a strange or unique conversation that gets a lot into psychology. So I hope you guys are all ready for this. But the first thing that I want to share is that lone talents are not a new thing in Heroes of the Storm. We've actually had one in the game, and it's been on Alarak. Alarak has had something called Hasty Bargain. It is the strongest rewind talent in the game for two reasons. One, because it's on a damage dealer. There's not a lot of rewind talents on damage dealers. They're usually on tanks, which can be good because it allows more CC on a tank. But the second reason why this is one of the strongest rewind talents in the game is because it has the lowest cooldown of rewind talents in the game. Being at 20 seconds, you could potentially use this rewind talent twice in a single fight, where most rewind talents are usually used once in a fight, and that's it. Hasty Bargain has one major downside, is that every time that you use Hasty Bargain, you reduce your damage by 4%. So, if you are going to use Hasty Bargain, every time that you use it, you are getting weaker. Now, after using it like 100 times, naturally your damage is going to be cut in half. And the reason it's that it's not 100 times. 10 times is 40%. 20 times is 80%. If you use it 20 times, you're about cutting 24 times, 23 or 4 times. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. It's different because of how much sadism you have. But let's say you use it 25 times, your damage is cut in half. And the reason why is because your damage gets increased because of sadism. That doesn't really matter. This is a lone talent. Now, what is interesting about lone talents is that in the few instances where we've had talents that kind of lose value over time, and this could be something that is as simple as a damage boost early game that becomes weaker as the game goes on just because that damage boost runs out. Like, for example, Hanzo's level 1 talent, Target Practice. You get 100 more damage on your Stormbow, but that doesn't scale. So the longer the game goes on, that 100 damage becomes weaker because the damage of your ability is increasing, but not this talent. So the talent itself loses value over time. And that exists in small aspects throughout the game in different ways. But that's kind of the interesting thing, is that we have things like that in the game already. The best example just so happens to be Hasty Bargain. So with a new concept, you'd imagine that this would be based upon two very popular talents. Or in this case, let's just say one. But if we actually go to, let's say, Alarak and see how many people are playing this talent, we'll come to find out that this talent is the least popular talent on this tier. And you might be saying, well, Counter-Strike's less popular than that. It's really not, because Counter-Strike cannot be taken if you took Counter-Strike at level 10, which most people do. So out of the people that are picking Deadly Charge, with 25% of them, we see that 15% of them are picking Counter-Strike, which is upward of like 60% of those that are taking this talent are taking Counter-Strike, which means ultimately this is a way more popular talent than Hasty Bargain. Hasty Bargain is the least popular talent on this tier, and yet it's the highest win rate talent, which brings me to the point that people don't really like the idea of losing something that they've chosen to gain. Which comes back to kind of some basic psychology. Everyone who's taken Psych 101 knows behavioral psychology, which we'll talk about. And it talks about punishments. But before I get into behavioral psychology, I want to talk about quests and why quests are interesting, and what makes a good quest and what makes a bad quest. So the first thing that I want to bring up is what makes a good quest. So this is equity theory of motivation, and this is kind of a nutshell of it. If you give a big reward for a small challenge, it devalues the reward in comparison to the challenge, which makes it to where the challenge is nothing, but the reward feels weak. And so that comes back to this lone talent. Basically, you're getting a giant reward for no challenge. It's a level 1 talent. You literally click the button on the hero that you've already picked, and there was no challenge because you're already level 1. Which means that this is going to devalue the feeling of this. No matter how good this talent is balance-wise, the feeling of this talent is immediately going to start off as weak. And so that's the first thing that I notice about this talent, is that it kind of breaks the first rule of equity theory, which is if you have a big reward and a small challenge, it devalues the reward. This reward is not going to feel like a reward at all. It's going to feel like a level 1 option, and you're just picking the best of the options, and that's about it. Now, on the opposite side of that, if you have a small reward and a big challenge, the challenge doesn't feel worth it. And that could be quests that are just really difficult to complete, or quests that require you to do something that you don't really want to be doing. So a good example of this would be like Stukov's level 1 W quest. And what that is let me find Stukov really quick so that you guys can see. Fetid Touch quest, and it's a quest that keeps going and it keeps growing, and this will probably look better to show on Here Is the Storm. We go to Healers, Stukov, Talents, Fetid Touch. You need to hit people with your weighted pustule. Well, the problem is you don't really want to be just throwing your weighted pustule out, because it's such an integral part of what Stukov does. But then on top of that, it's almost not even as good as his other level 1 talents, which means that the reward is not worth the challenge to put out, which means that people just aren't going to be picking that talent, and they're not going to be attempting that challenge. And that's same with every game that you play. If there is let's say a particular event or something in a game, or a challenge in a game that doesn't have a good reward, people won't do it. I play a lot of Guild Wars 2, and one of the things that kind of bothers me is that there are dungeons in the game, but the dungeons don't really have any good rewards. So people just don't do the dungeons anymore. I love the dungeons. I think they're a ton of fun, but nobody does them anymore. Like, I would love to just use them to level up, to get like the designed gear and everything, but the gear that it gives is bad. And so people don't do dungeons. And it's because the reward needs to be worth the challenge. The dungeons are time consuming, and they give almost no reward, so nobody's going to do them. They're not very difficult, but they're just not worth it. As far as the medium reward, if you give a medium reward and a medium challenge, then people feel that it's worth it, right? If people feel that the reward is worth the task, it doesn't devalue the reward, and it feels worth doing. So whenever you're designing a concept in a game, and a good example of this is like Medivh. Medivh has a quest baseline that says if you hit 40 enemy heroes with Arcane without dying, you permanently increase the damage by 75, and the cooldown is reduced to by 1 second whenever you hit someone with it, which makes it to where it's a 1 second cooldown. This significantly increases the DPS of your queue, and it's a great challenge. It's a challenge to get 40 stacks of this without dying. You need to put a little bit of risk in there every time that you get a stack, because you might lose those things. But there's an amazing reward at the end, which means that this fits perfectly within that. And I think everyone really loves this talent because it's fun to play, and it's fun to play against. There's something, you get rewarded if you ever kill a Medivh that's trying to get this quest done, but he gets rewarded if he ever completes it. If he's playing super safe, then he probably completes it a little bit late, which means that it's kind of rewarding to play against. And it's just an overall amazing quest that has great design. Another quest that has pretty good design, one of my favorite quests to always bring up, is Ragnaros's level 1 Sulphurous Hunger. It allows you to do something a little bit different than what you normally do to get the quest completed. It's a pretty strong quest that increases the damage that you deal, and it also heals for the damage that you deal, so it's also going to increase your healing. It's a great quest because it not only helps you, it's got a good design, but it also teaches something about the game, which is you should be focusing on killing minions and coming up with a creative way to clear the minions for that hero, which is something that everyone should be doing on all of their heroes. You should find the most efficient way to clear your minion wave. Where Ragnaroses are trying to learn the most efficient way to clear the minion wave where you end with your Q, most other heroes should find the way to clear the minion wave with the least amount of mana cost and the least amount of time. Yet, so I love this quest design because it teaches something about the game. So now that we understand what is a good quest design and why loans kind of fit in the initial bad design of big reward, small challenge makes it feel less like a reward. Well, if this feels less like a reward, then it's only going to feel like a punishment, which is where we get into the basics of behavioral psychology. Basics of behavioral psychology: rewards feel good, punishments feel bad. We want to repeat things that reward us, we want to avoid things that punish us, both consciously and subconsciously. Overall, rewards we want to repeat, punishments we want to avoid. So, what's going to end up happening with loan talents is that even if they're good talents, if they're too strong, of course, everyone's going to pick them and they're going to get nerfed. But if they're even balanced, they're not going to be fun. And that's my biggest concern with this particular idea of loan talents, is that if we keep this idea of getting something for nothing and then losing that thing, all we're going to feel is the negative aspect of it. Quests are fun because they fit basic psychology, right? The more you do something. Now, there's an entire psychology about doing something, and I might get into that. I feel like I've gotten into that before, when you get into like operant conditioning, and the more you do something compared to the amount of times you're rewarded depends on how addicting and how much you want to keep coming back to that thing. And this is a great example of how you should approach game design to keep people coming back to your game. But I'm not talking about that right now. I'm talking about the fact that this has no major reward and it only has punishment, so it's not going to be fun to play. We saw with Alarak that it was his best talent on his tier, or at least one of the best talents on the tier, best talent as far as win rate goes, but it was also the lowest played talent with understanding how his top talent works. It was his lowest played talent because it's not fun to lose what you feel like you've gained at some point. And so that's my biggest concern. So take everything that I've said with a grain of salt because it's just on one particular idea. And I love that the team is looking at trying new things. My biggest concern is when they spend 10 weeks in between patches, maybe even more. I don't even remember anymore. It's been so long. To give us something that we may not even use because it has bad design psychologically. As far as balance-wise, I like the idea of having early game talents. And this was actually a video that I wanted to bring out pretty recently to talk about early game talents, mid game talents, and late game talents, as well as explaining what is early game, what is mid game, and what is late game. And I probably will be making that video relatively soon. And these will actually help with that video because now we have more talents that are great early game and potentially bad late game. And it could really bring up some ideas and strategies about specific maps that have a little bit more of snowball effects, like Brax's Holdout. If you take a lot of early game talents on Brax's Holdout, you win one objective, you have a significant lead for the rest of the game, even if you lose some of those talents later in the game. So I think as far as a gameplay standpoint, this is a good design, and it could be rather fun. But I'm really concerned about the psychological aspect of designing talents that are more unfun to play, which kind of breaks League of Legends' first rule. Is it fun to play? Is it fun to play against? And is it possible to balance? This is fun to play against. It's possible to balance. But is it fun to play? I don't really think so. And we'll see, because certain of the talents, again, Johanna, these are boring talent. Johanna is known for having boring talents. I mean, Subdue is pretty fun with that quest, but for the most part, Johanna is a relatively boring hero. So giving her 20 flat max health is a very boring idea, and it could be very strong, and we'll see. But that's just what I wanted to bring up about this. This is what loan talents are. Loan talents are going to be entering the game within either tomorrow or next Wednesday. And I just wanted to explain a little bit of the psychology behind what these talents are. And if they don't feel good to play, now you know why. If they are fun, I would imagine it's because your team has kind of made a conscious decision to make, to have a plan. And then what ends up happening is you're actually kind of metagaming your psychology a little bit, because instead you're rewarding yourself for the plan that you created. And so that's the only reason why this may be a fun talent, is if your whole team picks lone talents and you're on a map that rewards early game play, you're actually rewarding yourself for your successful strategy planning more so than the talent itself. But it does have potential. I think for gameplay, I like them coming up with new things. And if this is easy to design and easy to test, let's keep it coming out. But my concern is that it probably wasn't that easy to implement because it took 10 weeks. Again, take everything with a grain of salt. This is based on a single talent, and we'll know more when the patch hits. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this ended up being a little bit of a longer video for what was basically just revealing a teaser that is out in this game. And it's all just one talent. I probably could have explained this and said my thoughts about this talent in like 5 minutes, but I wanted to explain a little bit more about it, especially if by any chance like someone who is working on a game watches these videos and realizes that there's more to creating a talent than having it just the gameplay perspective. Some things just need to be fun to play, and there are some ideas that are fun and some ideas that are not. I find in there's this one item in League of Legends. So I play both League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm. There's one item, not to keep this going even longer, but there's this one item in League of Legends that I just don't like taking because I feel like I just don't get the value that I should be out of this talent or this item. Yet it's in like every build in the heroes that I play or the champions I play. It's in every build, and I always skip it. Like I play a lot of tanky supports, kind of like Uther. And there's this item in this game that says like you mark an ally, and if you stun an enemy, your ally will do more damage to that enemy that you just stunned. Sounds good, except that the problem is there's two things that need to happen that don't always happen. One is that you need to be near that ally. Two, you need to stun the target. And three, your ally needs to hit the specific target that you're stunning, which all three of those things don't happen as often as I want because I like to roam around a lot. If I'm playing Uther, I'm going to go roam up to top lane and to the solo lane and go like stun someone so my solo laner can get a kill. Well, I most likely would have marked someone like a carry that I'd be following around. And because it has such a long cooldown on marking, it's just not worth it. I just never take that item. And there's talents like that for me as well that I just don't like because they're just not fun to play. Requires way too many things to happen, and it's just not as rewarding as it is for as many things that need to happen. So when you're making a game, you've got to design it with psychology in mind to keep people coming back to your game. And I could go on and on about game design and operant conditioning and how you need to make sure that your game encourages people to keep coming back to your game. But that's not worth it. This video is already too long for what it is. That being said, I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. What do you think about lone talents? I feel like I kind of trashed them a little bit, but I wasn't meaning to. I think that as far as the game design, it can be a really cool thing for that early, mid, late game thing. There is a psychology behind it that may make them feel like unfun talents, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad talents. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you think that these talents will be fun? Do you think that they'll be entertaining? Or do you think that they'll be at the very least easy to balance and could bring something to the game? Are you guys excited to try out the new lone talents? I'm excited to at least see what other things they do. Being as Johanna's a little boring by herself, I'd like to see what else comes out of it. So with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to check out my future videos, and hopefully we get that balance patch tomorrow, because I think it should be rather fun.